From Los Angeles and New York, this is Democracy Now! Video has gone viral showing a group of Catholic high school students apparently mocking an indigenous elder near the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The students, many of whom were wearing Make America Great Again hats, had just attended the March for Life. Omaha elder Nathan Phillips was attending the Indigenous Peoples March. The incident has sparked a national debate. We'll speak to Elder Nathan Phillips about what happened, as well as Chase Ironeyes, who helped organize the Indigenous Peoples March, as well as Native American writer David Troyer, author of the new book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to Today. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the partial government shutdown enters its 32nd day, lawmakers prepare to vote on several bills this week aimed at ending the impasse over President Trump's demand for $5.7 billion to fund a border wall. On Saturday, Trump proposed a new deal promising to shield DACA, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals protections, for 3 years, as well as protections for those who have temporary protected status, or TPS, in exchange for funding his border wall. Democrats rejected the deal, which would not provide long-term protections or a path to citizenship for affected individuals. Despite this, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he will bring the proposal up for a vote this week. Meanwhile, House Democrats are moving forward with their own proposals aimed at ending the shutdown. 800,000 government workers now face the prospect of missing their second paycheck since the government shutdown started, as they continue to either be furloughed or work without pay. On Friday, thousands of people took part in the Indigenous Peoples March in Washington, D.C., while another march, the Anti-Abortion March for Life, also took place in the Capitol. Video went viral over the weekend of an interaction between an Indigenous elder and a group of Catholic high school students from Kentucky who'd attended the March for Life protest. In the video, Omaha elder Nathan Phillips is seen peacefully playing his drum and singing while seemingly being taunted by students, some of whom were wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great Again. We'll have more on this story with Omaha elder Nathan Phillips after headlines. Women took to the streets across the country and the world Saturday, 2 years after the historic 2017 Women's March protesting President Trump's inauguration. In New York City, Democracy Now! Spoke to participants at the Women's Unity Rally, one of two separate events held in the city for the Women's March.
My name is Michelle Folks. This is my daughter, Sophia. She's 17 months, and so I'm here to fight for women's equality, and I think it's really important that she sees her mother doing these things so she can feel empowered and grow into an even more confident woman. I'm also a teacher, and so I want my students to be able to know that I am always actively fighting for women's rights so they can also feel empowered to do the same thing.
My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm the Congresswoman for New York's 14th District, and I think that to be a woman is to be politicized in America today, and so really what we need to focus on is the issues that we are here to advance, which is social, economic, and racial justice for all people in the United States and abroad.
In a rare move, the Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller issued a statement Friday denying the principal claim of a damning BuzzFeed article which said the special counsel had evidence that Trump directed his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. BuzzFeed told CNN Sunday it remains 100% behind its reporting. Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley has called for an FBI perjury investigation into Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen for lying about the Trump administration's family separation policy. Senator Merkley released a 2017 memo Thursday that showed a Trump administration policy option involving, quote, separating family units. Secretary Nielsen has stated multiple times there's no policy to separate families, including during congressional testimony last month. A Department of Health and Human Services report last week found thousands more children were removed from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border than previously reported. In Afghanistan, Taliban fighters killed dozens of security forces at a military intelligence base in Wardak province Monday. Some reports put the number of dead as high as 100. The attack came as the Taliban and the U.S. are holding peace talks in Qatar. Last month, President Trump announced the U.S. will withdraw about half its troops in Afghanistan. In Syria, a car bomb injured members of a joint American-Kurdish patrol Monday, days after an ISIS-claimed attack in the city of Manbij killed 19 people, including 4 Americans. Meanwhile, Israel has confirmed it launched a series of airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria Sunday night. Reports are emerging the strikes killed at least 21 people, including 12 Iranian soldiers. In Yemen, U.S.-backed Saudi-led forces launched airstrikes on Yemen's capital Sana'a on Saturday night. Local reports say at least 2 civilians were killed. The strikes come as the UN attempts to broker peace talks with warring parties in Yemen. The UN has said 2 shipwrecks in the Mediterranean may have killed some 170 migrants who were crossing over to Europe. One ship reportedly sank off the coast of Libya with over 100 people on board. The UN says over 2,200 migrants either died or reported missing while crossing the Mediterranean in 2018. In Serbia, over 10,000 people marched through Belgrade Saturday to protest Aleksandar Vučić. Protesters are demanding press freedom and reforms to the country's electoral system. This weekend was the 8th consecutive week of large-scale anti-government protests in Serbia. In Venezuela, the government of President Nicolas Maduro said Monday it suppressed a military revolt, arresting a group of officers who stole weapons and kidnapped 4 officials. The attack at a National Guard outpost in the capital, Caracas, came shortly after a social media video circulated showing a sergeant calling for Venezuelans to support the removal of President Maduro. Maduro was inaugurated earlier this month to a second 6-year term. While some, including the United States, have called last year's election illegitimate, Maduro has accused the United States, along with Canada and 12 Latin American allies, of plotting a coup against its socialist government. To see our recent interview with Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arriaza, go to democracynow.org. In Colombia, the National Liberation Army, known as the ELN, claimed responsibility for a suicide bomb attack that killed at least 21 people and left at least 68 injured in the capital, Bogotá, Thursday. In a statement, the group said the attack, which targeted cadets at a police academy, was in response to government forces bombing an ELN camp last month in breach of a proposed ceasefire. Colombia's right-wing president, Iván Duque, said he is issuing arrest warrants for ELN representatives who are currently in Cuba for peace talks. In Mexico, the director of community radio station Radio Cachana was found dead in Baja California Sunday, the first journalist to be killed in Mexico this year. Rafael Murua Manriquez had reported receiving death threats and harassment after criticizing the mayor of Mulegé, Felipe Prado, and had been under federal protection. Journalism and free speech advocates are calling for an investigation into his killing. Meanwhile, in Ghana, gunmen shot and killed journalist and documentary filmmaker Ahmed Hussein Suele in a suburb of the capital, Accra, Wednesday. The undercover reporter who helped expose corruption in soccer was recently targeted by a Ghanaian lawmaker and member of the ruling New Patriotic Party who revealed the journalist's identity on television and told viewers to attack him. In Arizona, a judge rendered guilty verdicts for 4 activists from the humanitarian group No More Deaths. The volunteers were accused of crimes related to their efforts to leave water and food in the harsh Sonoran Desert to help refugees and migrants survive the deadly journey across the U.S. border. They now face up to 6 months in prison. In a statement, No More Deaths volunteer Catherine Gaffney said, "This verdict challenges not only No More Deaths volunteers, but people of conscience throughout the country. If giving water to someone dying of thirst is illegal, what humanity is left in the law of this country?" Unquote. 5 more volunteers with the group are still scheduled to face trial. To see our recent interview about this case, go to democracynow.org. In New York City, social leaders gathered at the Riverside Church in Harlem Monday to honor Martin Luther King, Jr. The church is where King delivered his seminal Beyond Vietnam speech April 4th, 1967. Democracy Now! Spoke to journalist Jamel Hill.
My fear today is that white supremacy has become mainstream. The fact that you have a lawmaker, a congressman who openly asks what's wrong with white supremacy or where did that term come from. I think that speaks to everything that we're seeing in this climate right now. Somehow it's become more distasteful to be known as a white supremacist than the actual practice of white supremacy, where it's more offensive to be labeled a racist as opposed to the actual practice of racism.
Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence came under fire after he compared Dr. King to President Trump over the weekend on CBS's Face the Nation, saying, quote, "You think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. That's exactly what President Trump is calling on the Congress to do," Pence said. On Monday, Trump and Pence paid an unannounced 2-minute visit to the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington. Again, they stayed for approximately 2 minutes. California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris has announced she will run for president in 2020. Harris, who shared the announcement Monday on Good Morning America, was previously the district attorney for San Francisco and the attorney general of California.
I feel a sense of responsibility to stand up and fight for the best of who we are. And that fight will always include, as one of the highest priorities, our national security.
Senator Harris is the child of immigrants, an Indian mother and Jamaican father. She chose to make her announcement on Martin Luther King Day and reportedly chose a red and yellow color scheme for her official logo as a nod to Shirley Chisholm, who in 1972 became the first black woman to run for president in the United States. Senator Harris is now the 4th woman to enter the 2020 Democratic race for president. In more news from the 2020 presidential election, Hawaii Congressmember Tulsi Gabbard, who announced her run earlier this month, released an online apology for past statements against the LGBTQ community.
In my past, I said and believed things that were wrong. And worse, they were very hurtful to people in the LGBTQ community and to their loved ones. I'm deeply sorry for having said them. My views have changed significantly since then, and my record in Congress over the last 6 years reflects what is in my heart.
Congressmember Gabbard has supported progressive legislation during her time in Congress, including backing Medicare for All and a Green New Deal. In 2016, the Iraq War veteran quit as Democratic National Committee vice chair and threw her support behind Senator Bernie Sanders' run for president. Gabbard has said her candidacy will center around war and peace and will focus on the U.S. foreign wars though some on the left have criticized some of her foreign policy views, including her relationship with India's ruling far-right BJP party and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In Chicago, former police officer Jason Van Dyke was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in prison for the 2014 murder of African-American teenager Laquan McDonald. Van Dyke fired 16 bullets into McDonald, even as dash cam video showed the teenager posed no threat. The day before Van Dyke's sentencing, a judge acquitted 3 officers accused of covering up the murder. A protest is planned in Chicago today over those acquittals. Sony-owned RCA Records has dropped musician R. Kelly from its label amidst the fallout from the damning docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. Last week, activists protested outside Sony headquarters in New York City to demand they stop working with R. Kelly. R. Kelly has been accused of sexual assault, predatory behavior, and pedophilia for 2 decades, but has never been criminally convicted. And a new Oxfam report finds billionaires' wealth increased by 12% in the past year, with the 26 richest people owning the same amount of money as the world's poorest 50%. Economic inequality hits women and girls the hardest, according to the report, which is being released ahead of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. This is Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of Oxfam.
So last year alone, we saw billionaire wealth increased by $2.5 billion every day, while the wealth of the bottom half of humanity, $3.8 billion, was dropping by $500 million a day. I'm here in Davos to call on governments to wake up and take up their responsibility and tax fairly, tax wealth, and put money in the public services that people need.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez in New York. Well, welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We turn now to a story that received widespread attention over the weekend. On Friday, thousands took part in the Indigenous Peoples March in Washington, D.C. The next day, video went viral of an interaction that took place soon after the march ended between an indigenous elder and a group of Catholic high school students from Kentucky who had attended a March for Life protest the same day.
In the video, Omaha elder Nathan Phillips is seen peacefully playing his drum and singing while being encircled by the students, some of whom were wearing red MAGA hats, Make America Great Again. The video appears to show the students taunting and mocking Phillips. Some of the students are seen making a tomahawk chop motion with their arms.
One student wearing a red MAGA hat is seen standing directly in front of Phillips while grinning and smirking. The video sparked widespread outrage. After the video went viral Saturday, the Catholic Conference of Kentucky condemned the students' actions, saying, quote, "This behavior is opposed to the church's teachings on the dignity and respect of the human person." Newly elected Native American Congresswoman Debbie Haaland tweeted, quote, the students' display of blatant hate, disrespect, and intolerance is a signal of how common decency has decayed under this administration. Heartbreaking. But the story didn't end after the first video went viral on Saturday. As the weekend progressed, more videos were posted online showing a fuller picture of what happened. It was Nathan Phillips who first approached the students in an attempt to defuse a tense situation between the students and a small group of Black Hebrew Israelites who were screaming offensive statements at the group of students.
Show Nathan Phillips was soon encircled by students after he approached them and was drumming. Another participant in the Indigenous Peoples March, Hunter Hooligan, wrote, quote, "We were surrounded by the boys and we were alarmingly outnumbered. As we attempted to continue our path and move through the crowd, the boys closed in around us until finally one particular boy stood in front of Nathan and refused to let us pass," unquote. According to Hunter Hooligan, some of the students were also chanting, "Build the wall." The student who faced off with Phillips, a high school junior named Nick Sandman, said he too was trying to defuse a tense situation. Sandman released a statement by a PR firm. It said in part, quote, "I believe that by remaining motionless and calm, I was helping to defuse the situation. I said a silent prayer that the situation would not get out of hand." The statement went on to read, quote, "I was not intentionally making faces at the protester. I did smile at one point because I wanted him to know I was not going to become angry, intimidated, or be provoked into a larger confrontation," unquote. The incident has sparked widespread debate on how the media handled the story. Some media commentators apologized for criticizing the students. Even President Trump weighed in, tweeting, quote, Looking like Nick Sandman and Covington Catholic students were treated unfairly with early judgments proving out to be false, smeared by the media, not good, but making big comeback. Trump then quoted Tucker Carlson saying, quote, "New footage shows media was wrong about teens' encounter with Native American," unquote. But others continued to criticize the actions of the students. Deadspin published an article titled, "Don't Doubt What You Saw with Your Own Eyes." New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg tweeted that Deadspin piece saying, "Here the rush to disavow was itself a kind of mob reaction." Well, we're joined right now by Nathan Phillips, the Omaha elder who participated in the Indigenous Peoples March on Friday. Nathan Phillips is a Vietnam-era veteran and previous director of the Native Youth Alliance. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Nathan. Thank you for staying in Washington to talk to us. Can you start off by telling us, just lay out for us what happened on Friday? The march had broken up. You were on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Is that right? And then tell us what you saw.
Yes, that is right. At the end of the Indigenous Peoples March, we had already been encountered with the Black Israelites. They showed up around 2 o'clock in the afternoon while we were still in our process of our rally on the steps. And they were hurling all kinds of insults and abuses at us, the indigenous people. But what I seen was in one of the videos is that one of the indigenous peoples did go up to them, visit with them, and then turn around and walk away. And then when the youth that were, done with the march, the protest that they were at, started coming through to go meet their bus, encountered the same Black Israelites and took a different route. And instead of responding to hate with love, they responded hate with hate. We thought there at the march that the best thing to do was to ignore the Black Israelites the best we could, and to pray for them for their actions there on the mall. We really didn't understand that their presence there and harassing us, but we just went ahead on with our rally. Then things started escalating between the Black Israelites and the youth. The youth kept on encountering them, going away and coming back and encountering them again. And each time they came back with larger numbers until where it shows, where the video is, where there's, close to 200 of those young youth out there. And they got into a mob mentality. That's what a lot of other people have described it as.
And Nathan,
standing on the side. Yes.
And Nathan Phillips, the Black Israelites, you're saying that there were at some point as many as 200 of the youth from Kentucky. The size of the group of the Black Israelites that you saw, and also why you decided then to try to come between them?
When it got to about 200 youth and the screaming and the hollerings, and the images were the same images that I seen in pictures of youth, young white people surrounding a Black youth trying to eat at a counter. The same faces that were on the crowds of those youth at the D.C. was the same faces of the youth that were surrounding the young Black woman who was trying to get an education, and the scorns and the scowls that were on the pictures there. The same pictures of when you see pictures of lynchings, the same faces on the folks that were doing the lynchings. That's what these young people's faces looked like. They were angry. They were. They got to a point where it was scary. Some folks came up to me. Some of our young indigenous folks came up to me and said, "We got to do something." And when they said that, my first thought is that this isn't our fight. This ain't our business. We're here with a permit to do our event. But as things started getting worse and worse, there was a group that I found out last night that the mocking chant that they were doing apparently was supposed to be a haka. When I seen them out there doing that, that didn't look like no haka, but that's beside the point. The point is that the young man who led that was Mr. Sadman. He asked his teacher, can I lead this? Can I drown out those people? And there's always only about 4 of those black Israelites. They never got any larger, they got no smaller, but they didn't never change their rhetoric, you know. But this is America, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. And that's what those black Israelites were doing, just the same way as the West Barrel.
Nathan, can you talk about what happened then as you came over and started drumming, you said, to diffuse the situation? And now you know this young man named Sandman standing in front of you and the group of students behind them. Talk about what you did there, the song you chose to sing, how you felt about the students who were there, about how close you were to this young student.
When I was asked to help defuse this moment, I picked up the drum. It's a drum of instrument of prayer. And so I took that drum and started hitting it and started singing a song known as the American Indian Movement song. It's a song of unity. It's a song of honor and respect and prayer. And that's why I chose that song, is to bring unity between what I've seen happening to the fabric of America, the racism, the bigotry. And as I sang, I was going to just stand at the side, but I was putting myself in prayer. And at that time, just before I started that song, my prayer was, God, help me. Witness what's going on here, God, protect us. And
why did you say, God,
prayer,
help me? Were you afraid?
I was absolutely afraid. There was a group of over 200 young, angry white men who were displaying mob mentality. And they were facing down just 4 black individuals. And it was coming to a point where just a snap of the finger could have caused them kids to descend on those 4 individuals. I didn't agree with the black Israelites and what they were saying, but what I do believe is that America is a land of freedoms. And as much as I disagreed with those black Israelites, they had the right to be there.
And Nathan Phillips, the young man who was staring you down, did he at any time say anything to you? Because it's obvious that the youths in the background are either making catcalls or yelling, and but he's standing there silently. Do you recall what were some of the catcalls that were coming out, being directed at you by the other youths in the back?
Some of the things that were said, I just don't want to repeat, but there were comments of build that wall, and I've heard these comments so many times in my years that I've just gotten to a point where I ignore the words that come at me, you know, the derogatory words, excuse me. And so when we were there and we came face to face with Mr. Sandman, right before that, and when it shows me walking towards the group started spreading apart. And that was the moment when we thought we was going to try to be out of that situation, and I was going to take my people out of that situation. And I seen a higher ground behind them, the Lincoln Memorial. And as I was in the process and he's there, my mind is that I'm in prayer. You know, this is where my thought is, that I'm not thinking of anything else other than staying in prayer and staying with the thought that I want God to come witness in what's happening into my America. You know, the racism that's happening. And
Nathan, I wanted to read the statement of Nick Sandman, the Covington High School student, whose PR firm wrote, "The protester everyone has seen in the video began playing his drum as he waded into the crowd. He locked eyes with me and approached me, coming within inches of my face. He played his drum the entire time he was in my face. I never interacted with this protester. I did not speak to him. I did not make any hand gestures or other aggressive moves. I believe that by remaining motionless and calm, I was helping to diffuse the situation." Your response?
Copycat? You know, because that's the first interview I ever gave, that's the statement I made. That I didn't go out there when I was asked to do something, and I didn't know what it was, and I turned to God to help me, and the Creator put me there, and it was to stand between white and black racism. And that's where I was at. And that's when I realized where I was at, the dangerous situation I was in. And that was when they surrounded us. And I couldn't go left, I couldn't go right, we couldn't go back without running into this mob. And I was motionless for a moment. And then that's when I took my first step, and that crowd backed up. And then when I took my second step, that crowd even broke ranks, and by the time I started walking that way, there was a little gap that we could exit in, and that's the way we was going. And then when I started walking up there, I wasn't focusing on anybody except taking the youth out of there, the indigenous youth that was with me, out of that situation.
And Nathan Phillips...
And that's when Mr. Sandman stood in front of me and blocked my path.
Nathan, you mentioned that the youth kept chanting, "Build the wall." Now, this is astounding, given the fact that there was a confrontation that initially began between African-American, a small group of African-Americans and white youths, and then morphed into them confronting you, a Native American, and yet they're chanting, "Build the wall," as if the "build the wall" has become basically a catch-all white supremacist term that can be applied to anybody who some folks may feel is a threat to them?
I sure appreciate that that definition of "build that wall" statement, because that's exactly what I felt when I went in front of that mob and what appeared to be their prey. All that hate and anger transferred to me. It just came to me. And that's what I say, is when I realized the situation we had gotten into, and to build that wall, it was just surprised me. You know, because they were, you know, after those 4 black Israelites. And then when it seems that I was going to not stand by and let this happen, they turned all that anger onto me.
Nathan, I wanted to ask you about the song you were singing. I was reading a tweet of Nick Estes, who said, Nate Phillips is singing the American Indian Movement song known as the Raymond Yellow Thunder Song, which honored the life of an Oglala elder brutally murdered by white settlers in Gordon, Nebraska in 1972. It's about resistance and remembrance. Can you tell us why you chose this song?
What I've been saying in the past is that when I put myself in front of that crowd and I sang that song, it was with that thought that somebody could have stood in front of that crowd that murdered Raymond Yellow Thunder. If somebody could have been there and said, this is wrong. If somebody could have been in front of Lieutenant Kelly at some time in his life and say, you're going down the wrong path. if somebody could have stood in front of the 7th Cavalry before Wounded Knee and said, "This is wrong."
Can you sing a little bit
in front of them?
Can you sing a little bit of it here?
There's no words to this song. It just comes from the heart. And when I was ripped away from my family when I was 5 years old in Nebraska, and I returned to my home, to my family when I was a youth in the 70s, the early 70s, I met my brother, Raleigh Phillips, and he taught me that song. That's the first song I ever learned, I was ever taught.
Were you afraid what would happen when you finished the song?
Yes, I was, and I didn't know how to finish that song or where to finish it. If I finished it right there, surrounded by that mob, then what do I do? So that's where's the thought and you know, to try and exit that situation.
What broke this up is someone calling to the students saying their bus was there. That's what pulled them away?
Well, apparently, but at the same time, when they all exited there in mass, running away, moments after they ran away, a squad of uniformed officers showed up. So, in my mind, well, yes, they could say they're running to the bus, but if you look at it from another angle, they're running from the police.
Well, Nathan Phillips, I want to thank you for being with us. Omaha elder who participated in the Indigenous Peoples March. Many people have seen your face, have seen you chanting, singing, and drumming at the end of that Indigenous March. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, one of the organizers of the Indigenous March, the Native American attorney, Chase Iron Eyes, will join us. And then we'll speak with the author of a new book being published today, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. Stay with us.
What if Maya didn't speak out? What if Langston Hughes didn't write it down? What if Josephine Baker didn't dance it out? No. Tell me, where would we be now? What if Soul Journal never told the truth? Or Ida B. Wells never printed the news? Harriet never went underground. Where would we be now? We are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. We can change the world with our love.
What If by India Ari. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles with Juan Gonzalez in New York.
We continue to look at the video that has gone viral showing a group of Catholic high school students apparently mocking an indigenous tribal leader near the Lincoln Memorial. The students, many of whom were wearing Make America Great Again hats, had just attended the March for Life. Omaha elder Nathan Phillips was attending the Indigenous Peoples March.
We're joined now by Chase Iron Eyes, activist, lead attorney for the Lakota People's Law Project, spokesperson for the Indigenous Peoples March. Thank you for joining us from South Dakota. You just came back from Washington, D.C., Chase. You were there. I mean, this was the end of the march, well after, but you witnessed what took place. Now the world has seen the video. And some have said, well, this whole story changed once the young man in the video, who is smiling in front of Omaha elder Nathan Phillips, once he issued a statement saying that he was not hostile, he was trying to defuse the situation. Chase, can you describe what you watched, where you were standing?
Yes, thank you for covering this again, and thank you for Nathan for offering his song today and on Friday, right after the Indigenous Peoples March, the first inaugural. I'm not quite sure what time it was when the whole incident went down, because we had finished our march early, and we had a permit to be there at the Lincoln Memorial. It would have ended around 5 o'clock, so it would be interesting to look at the time frames. Nonetheless, where the indigenous singers, including Nathan Phillips, including Raymond Kingfisher, and about 4 other supporters, I mean, they were very small in number, and they were closing out the ceremonies, because I was standing right there near them waiting for my daughter, who was at the top of the Lincoln Memorial. Now, at the top of the Lincoln Memorial, it's a good 100 meters away from where Nathan Phillips was, and even where the Black Israelites were. The Black Israelites were just trying to offend any and everybody who came within earshot of them. And so we expelled them or denied them from our space at the Indigenous Peoples March. They were trying to speak, but we said, no, you just go over here, and as long as you're not trying to exert violence or come into our space anymore, we'll leave you alone. So that's what we did. And you got to realize that the Black Israelites and the Native people were at the bottom, the very bottom of the Lincoln Memorial. The MAGA swag hat wearing kids who were attending a different rally. Here's 100 or so frenzied young men who are attending a rally to deny women the right to assert sovereignty over their own bodies. They were brought there by the Covington Catholic Church. They were all donning their little MAGA swag hats. And the truth is, they were roaming around there for a long time. I don't know how many minutes, but the new video surfaced of the Black Israelites, doing what they did and offending everybody they possibly could. But other video also surfaced showing the MAGA swag kids verbally accosting passersby, women, others, appropriating the haka dance and so forth. And if there was drone footage possibly of a 100-foot view, you'd be able to see that the MAGA swag kids, the Covington Catholic kids, invade the space of where Nathan and the Black Israelites are standing. And so they come closer to the Israelites and are there being disruptive, being very loud. It's a very tense situation. When they get closer, I move away. I actually moved away from close proximity, because I was honestly concerned for my own safety. And at that time, I did not know where my daughter was. But now you have PR firms, you have people trying to spin this each and every way, even in mainstream media. And people are looking past the fact that there was a racially charged environment. You have young kids who are representing the President of the United States, Donald Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." We're in a country where Native Americans, or the original civilizers, tribal nations, however you want to term that, we have to occupy a certain space in the American imagination, the Western imagination. We are, according to that mythology, that worldview, we are the savage, we are the primitive, we are uncivilized, we are antithetical to progress. And so if you combine that with the mascotry, with the caricaturization that exists with not only institutions including Hollywood and all the educational materials that are out there that tell us, Indians were half naked roaming the plains, they weren't civilized, this land was pristine, it was virgin, it was manifest destiny, it was our God-given right to come out here. Indians kind of showed up at Thanksgiving and blessed us with the first meal. This is the history that we learn. This is part of our identity, part of our mythology. Our cultural mythology as Americans contemplates the genocide of American Indians, the slavery of black folks. And so we're in the nation's capital. You have a president who constantly uses Pocahontas as a racial slur and also a denigration against the epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women, because Pocahontas was a victim of child rape and kidnapping. And then you have the president making light and being flippantly dehumanizing and offensive about our genocide here in Lakota country. You know, my family literally survived Wounded Knee. And so when he says the things he does, he gives license to young, impressionable minds. And though, you know, through all this spin, our elder, Nathan Phillips, sought to offer his song, his prayer, his peace to prevent a violent situation.
Chase, we don't have much time. We don't have much time, but I wanted to ask, you were there, you saw all the students there from the Kentucky Covington Catholic High School. Did you see adults? Were you concerned the situation was going to get out of hand?
I was very concerned that it was going to get out of hand. It was like a tinderbox. There were so many youth jumping up and down, jeering. It was a mob frenzy. They were ridiculing. They were exhibiting nothing but contempt and scorn for one of our elders who was offering a peaceful and prayerful song. And I looked for adults. If they were there, they were wearing MAGA hats too and encouraging this delinquency that these young people, and I'll give him that. When I looked at them, I saw young children, impressionable young spirits and minds who need right now, at this time, rather than fight over all the spin and all the angles and facts and controverted everything, we need the adults in the room. That includes our elder Nathan Phillips. That includes the Archdiocese of the Covington Catholics. That could potentially include Pope Francis. Donald Trump is tweeting about it. We have a very special and tremendous opportunity to let the Spirit guide the political, racial, social discourse that we're engaged in here in the fight for the heart and soul of our country right now.
Chase Iron Eyes, I want to ask you, you're talking about the importance of adults stepping up. There are now two Native American women in Congress who weighed in on what happened. Can you talk about the importance of their being in the new Congress?
Yes, well, we don't have to convince them that tribal sovereignty is a good thing, that missing and murdered Indigenous women need to be tracked. They need their voice amplified. We don't have to educate them of how the patriarchy objectifies and oppresses females worldwide. We support them in ending the government shutdown. We support AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, enforcing a Green New Deal. We feel that as tribal nations, our Green New Deal is a million years old. And we're glad to see more than 100 new women in the halls of Congress completely changing the energy and the dynamic. As you can see, you know, some of those forces are trying to, quote unquote, rein in AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But now more than ever, we here in tribal nations on the streets, on the res, at the grassroots level need to be as loud as we can, project as much positive force as we can so they know that they can be as bold as we know they want to be.
Chase Iron Eyes, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Activist, lead attorney for the Lakota People's Law Project, spokesperson for the Indigenous Peoples March. This is Democracy Now! When we come back in 30 seconds, the heartbeat of Wounded Knee. We will speak with the author, David Troyer. Stay with us.
Always start with you, alive and well, and not me. I'd gladly give up every poem I've ever spoken, have my mouth call back each and every one of them from your ears back into my pen's failed attempts at trying to put back the splintered pieces of our hearts, staring at a blank page, wishing we could begin again.
Thousands of warriors will come rushing in. Our ancestors wage war with the government in the spirit of Spotted Tail and John Trudell. This is
7 by Frank Wong here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles. Juan Gonzalez is in New York.
Well, we end today's show with The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, a stunning new book by David Troyer that looks at Native America from 1890 to the present day. The book's powerful mix of memoir, extensive interview, and storytelling presents decades of indigenous history that have been sidelined by the mainstream. It takes its name from Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, the 1970 book by D. Brown that tells the story of the Wounded Knee massacre. In his book's prologue, David Troyer writes, quote, This book tells the story of what Indians in the United States have been up to in the 128 years that have elapsed since the 1890 massacre of at least 150 Lakota Sioux at the Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. What we've done, what's happened to us, what our lives have been like. It is adamantly, unashamedly about Indian life rather than Indian death, that we even have lives that Indians have been living in, have been shaped by, and in turn have shaped the modern world, is news to most people.
David Troyer is Ojibwe from the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. He teaches literature and creative writing at the University of Southern California. His new book, out today, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the present. He joins us here in Los Angeles. David, welcome to Democracy Now! Before we go into your book, although I think this very much fits in with what you write about, can you respond to what took place this weekend? And if you feel, with the statement of the student Nick Sandman saying he meant no harm, was trying to defuse the situation, that this changes the image of what we saw on video of the Omaha elder, Nathan Phillips, as he drummed, surrounded by these young high school students from Kentucky.
When I heard Sandman's statement, that sounded like a statement crafted by a PR firm. Didn't sound like the statement of a high school junior. And after the initial outrage, of course, we hear cries from the other side about the need for context. And there is a need for context. Covington, that school, has been accused of dressing up in blackface during basketball games. And they were, let's not forget the context that brought them to D.C. in the first place. You had a bunch of high school boys coming to D.C. to tell grown women what they should or shouldn't do with their bodies, and while wearing MAGA hats. So, yeah, we need more context, and I'm glad we're getting it now.
And David Troyer, why do you think this incident has touched such a nerve across the country?
Well, a couple of reasons, right? That nerve has been jangling for centuries. It's only now that maybe, parts of the country are hearing it. And, of course, that nerve has been further inflamed by the ways in which social media is designed to amplify pain. And that's certainly happening. But hopefully we can, use it to think more carefully and more deeply about what our country is and what we want it to be like.
Talk about the title of your book and what you are trying to convey as an Indigenous writer, a Native American writer. Your book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, why you even titled it that?
Well, it's something that I've experienced growing up at Leech Lake and going to grade school, middle school, and high school in a border town in Bemidji, Minnesota, and something that I think a lot of Native people have experienced is a really profound and punishing way in which people think of us as being dead. When my brother went to university, someone asked him, well, what are you? Where are you from? And he said, well, I'm Native. I'm Ojibwe from Leech Lake Reservation. And the woman he was talking to said, well, you're Indian? He said, yeah. She said, well, you can't be. And he said, why not? And she said, because we killed all of you. She couldn't even accept the fact that he was standing there living and breathing and excelling and achieving, no less. In her mind, in her imagination, real Indians are dead Indians. And so I wanted to write a book that I could use to show people that not only are we still alive, we're not merely surviving.
And David Troyer, you also seek through the book to demolish many of the myths that still prevail about Native Americans. What are some of those myths that you especially try to hone in on?
Well, that was one of them. One of them is that after 1890, in the popular imagination, and we share this, we share this imagination. Native people, I think, we've been trained and we've learned to see ourselves this way too. But we, in the popular imagination, 1890 was the end point. D. Brown says in his book, I end my story in 1890 at the massacre at Wounded Knee, where the culture and civilization of the American Indian was finally destroyed. I remember reading that in college and thinking, I'm not destroyed. My culture isn't destroyed. My community isn't destroyed. And that's one of the biggest myths, one of the biggest fantasies about us, is that after 1890, even though we might have been alive, all we've been doing is living some sort of painful afterlife. And what I wanted to show was, one, that we've been doing incredible things. Our strategies for survival have been complex and layered and intelligent. That's one thing. And the other thing is that not only have we been sort of shaped by America, but that America has been shaped by us. I mean, and I really believe this to be true, but I don't think you can get a full measure of what this country is or what it's about, much less understand its history without thinking about Native people. I mean, let's face it. At the Boston Tea Party, it wasn't just that colonists threw tea in Boston Harbor. They dressed up as Native people in buckskins and Gastoa and face paint, and then they threw tea in the harbor. Since its first revolutionary act, America has understood itself as existing in relation to us, and it has learned from us as much as we've learned from it. That's the other thing I wanted to do in this book.
Some of the myths that Native Americans are living in rural areas much more so than urban. You turn that around.
Yeah. I mean, Native people live on reservations. We live in border towns. We live in suburbs. And we live in cities. We are as spread out across the country and as migratory as anyone else.
And finally, David, how you want the media to cover Native America, I mean Native American communities, not just in response to MAGA hats or how President Trump describes Elizabeth Warren.
Well, there's this tendency to sort of only think about us or to only read stuff about us or listen to our music or to watch us on the news as a kind of liberal act, almost as a kind of community service. And the way I want to correct the media is sort of the way I want to correct all of us and how we understand our Native communities, which is as vital, alive, interesting, and important to the country.
Well, one of the people that you focus in on in your book is Helen Bryan Johnson, whose refusal to pay $147 taxes on her reservation trailer home led to a landmark Supreme Court decision. Could you talk about her and her importance to the modern Native American life?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. So in the 1970s, Helen Bryan was living on a trailer on the Leech Lake Reservation, my reservation. And someone rolled up in her yard and started taking pictures of her trailer, and she couldn't figure out why. And then they left, and then some months later, she got a tax bill from the county. And she thought to herself, why are they assessing a tax on my trailer? This is Indian land, and I'm a Native person, and this doesn't feel fair. This doesn't feel right. The tax bill was for $147, by the way. And Helen was a mother of, I think, 5 or 6 kids at the time. She worked for Head Start. She earned minimum wage. She could barely make ends meet. So for her, a $147 tax bill was a massive, a big problem.
David, we
for
have
her.
10 seconds.
And she fought it in court, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled in her favor, and that opened the way for Indian gaming.
But we're going to do part 2 of this conversation. This book is too important, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present by David Troyer. That does it for our program. This news, the Oscars have been announced for Best Documentary Free Solo, Hale County this evening, Minding the Gap of Fathers and Sons, and RBG. Congratulations for all. Those are the Oscar nominees. And we'll be doing a live stream this afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be interviewing Laverne Cox and Jacqueline Woodson, as well as Ava DuVernay interviewing Stacey Abrams. Also, David Oyelowo and Eva Longoria will be speaking in an afternoon of racial reconciliation. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles, Juan Gonzalez in New York.